The smell came first. Something chemical. Not clean the way clean is supposed to mean safe. The kind of clean that is trying too hard to cover something worse underneath. Plastic tubing. Metal, somewhere close. A low, persistent hum I could not locate. Not a machine exactly. More like the building itself, breathing. Then cold. Not the room. My left arm. A specific cold that started at the inside of my elbow and moved up toward my shoulder in a thin line. And I understood before I understood anything else that something was going into me through a needle I could not feel. I tried to open my eyes. One of them cooperated. The other took longer. White ceiling. A water stain in the far corner shaped like nothing in particular. A strip of fluorescent light that was not on but was still somehow present, the kind of light that exists even when it doesn't. Below me, the mattress had the particular firmness of something designed for function and not for comfort, and the pillow crinkled faintly when I turned my head, a sound like paper being folded very slowly. I moved my fingers, right hand first. 4 fingers and a thumb reporting in, doing what they were told. Then I tried the left, and the left arm did not move the way I expected. There was resistance at the shoulder. Something held it. Not pain exactly, more like weight. The weight of something that had happened to my body that my brain had not yet been told about. I was in a room, hospital. The word arrived without effort. The smell had already told me. The ceiling confirmed it. The specific quality of silence. That institutional hush that is not actually quiet, but is the sound of other people's suffering being professionally managed at some distance. That told me the rest. I was in a hospital room and I did not know why. That should have frightened me more than it did. But the body has its own priorities. First, inventory. What works? What doesn't? What can wait? My name is Nora Calloway. I am 32 years old. I work as a forensic bookkeeper, which means I spend my days looking at numbers that are supposed to add up and finding the reasons they don't. I am good at staying calm when things don't add up. I have been told this reads as coldness. It is not coldness. It is the habit of a person who learned early that reacting too quickly costs you the information you need. My left arm would not move properly. That was the first number that didn't add up. I turned my head and the room moved a half second after I did, like a camera on a slight delay. The whiteboard on the wall across from me came into focus in pieces, a frame, letters. My own name printed in someone else's handwriting in green marker, Nora Calloway. Below it, a date. I read the date. I read it again. I looked at the light coming through the narrow window to my right, late afternoon light, pale and used up, and I tried to make the date on the board agree with the last thing I could remember. It didn't. Not even close. The last thing I could remember was a Tuesday evening. My client meeting downtown had run long. I had left the building at 7:15. I remembered the cold of the sidewalk coming up through the soles of my shoes. I remembered unlocking my car. I remembered the intersection 2 blocks from the office where I always caught the light, because that light was timed for someone who didn't care about your schedule. That was Tuesday. The date on the board was not Tuesday. It was not even the same week as Tuesday. I had been here for 11 days. I knew this before anyone told me. The date on the board made the math impossible to avoid. 11 days in a room I did not remember entering. In a bed I did not remember lying down in, with something cold moving through my left arm and a shoulder that did not work right. The room had no flowers. I noticed this the way you notice something that should be there and isn't. The windowsill was bare. The tray table held a plastic pitcher of water and a cup and nothing else. No cards. No evidence that anyone had stood in this room and tried to make it feel like something other than what it was. The door was open. I could hear the corridor. Wheels on linoleum. A voice on an intercom calling a name, not mine. Nobody came. I lay still and took stock. Left arm compromised, likely the clavicle. A specific ache when I tried to raise it that felt structural rather than surface. Ribs, breathing was shallow on the right side. Head, a dull pressure behind my right eye, more like the memory of a headache than the thing itself. 11 days of someone else making decisions about my body while I was not in a position to object. The door swung slightly wider and a woman came in. She was in her 50s, grubs the color of a faded sky. Her hair was pulled back with no pretension about it. the kind of practical arrangement a person makes when they have been doing this job long enough to stop performing it. She moved to the machines first without looking at me, checked the readout, made a small adjustment to something on the IV line, and then turned and saw that my eyes were open. She did not perform surprise. She just nodded, the way someone nods when a thing they expected has occurred on schedule. She told me her name was Donna. She said it simply, without the particular bright warmth some medical people put into an introduction, as though warmth were a service they were providing. She picked up my chart, looked at it for a moment, set it back down. I asked her how long. She said 11 days. I had already known, but hearing it spoken aloud by another person made it a different kind of fact, the kind that has weight. I asked her about my family. She was quiet for 1 second, maybe 2. It was a controlled quiet, the quiet of someone who has an answer they are choosing how to give. She told me that my emergency contact had been notified on the first day, that they had confirmed receipt of the call. I waited for the next sentence, the one that said my mother had been in every day, that my brother Ryan had driven up from the city the same night, that my father had sat in the chair by the window, the one currently holding only a folded blanket, and waited. The next sentence did not come. Donna finished what she was doing at the machines. She poured fresh water into the cup and set it on the tray where I could reach it. She pulled a pen from her breast pocket, a plain blue ballpoint, the cheap kind that comes in packs of 12, and she made a note on a small card and tucked it under the edge of the water pitcher. At the door she paused. She did not turn around. She said it quietly, not as a comfort exactly, but as something she needed me to hear. "You have more people in your corner than you think." Then she was gone. I looked at the card. The ink was the same blue as the pen. It was not a medical note. It was 4 words in her handwriting that didn't explain themselves, that just sat there on the tray next to the water like something she had been waiting to leave for me. I read it. I set it back down. I did not know yet what she meant, and I did not have enough information to know how much it would eventually matter. A social worker came by an hour later. "Standard welfare check." She asked how I was feeling. I told her I wanted to know about the investigation into my accident. She said a detective named Marcus Webb from the traffic division had been assigned to the case. Then she paused over her clipboard in the way people pause when there is something they are deciding whether to say. She said the family had been in contact with the hospital during the first week, that the family had provided some medical background for the team. Background related to my history. I asked what history. She said, even more carefully, that it had been noted in my intake file that I had a history of substance issues, that the family had wanted to make sure the team was aware, that they had asked to be kept informed of my status but had said they needed some space to process. I looked at her. She looked at her clipboard. I have never used drugs recreationally in my life. I had 2 glasses of wine at a birthday dinner for a colleague the evening before my accident. That was the full extent of what was in my body when I drove to that intersection. I said, "Who provided that information?" She said, "It came from the family." I said nothing else. She finished her notes and left. The room was quiet again. I lay on the mattress that crinkled and listened to the corridor sounds and looked at the water stain on the ceiling, and I did something I have been trained to do. I did not react. I did not let the shape of what I was beginning to understand pull me into motion before I had all the information. I just filed it. History of substance issues. Provided before I was conscious to contradict it, provided by people who were notified on day 1, and had, in 11 days, not once appeared in this room. My phone was in a plastic bag on the bedside table. The screen was cracked. A single diagonal line across the glass, starting at the upper left corner and running toward the center. I reached out with my right hand and took the phone out and plugged it into the charger already sitting on the table, as if someone had placed it there in advance, as if someone had been in this room and left and not come back. The phone charged. Outside the window, the pale afternoon light thinned toward evening. The intercom called a name that wasn't mine. A cart moved past in the corridor and kept moving. Nobody came to check whether Nora Calloway was awake. I picked up the phone. 17 missed calls, all in the first 2 days, then nothing. My mother, "We are praying." My father, once, day 1, "Let us know if you need anything." My brother Ryan, nothing at all. Not one word in 11 days. Then I opened my email. A formal letter from my employer sent 5 days ago. It expressed concern about my fitness to continue in my role given recent reports from my family regarding my well-being. It said the company had a responsibility to act on information provided by next of kin. I read the phrase "recent reports from my family." I read it again. My hands went still on the cracked glass. The history of substance issues, the employer notification, both sourced to the same place, both moving in the same direction, building the same picture, laying the same foundation, and all of it done while I was unconscious in a room with no flowers and a chair by the window where nobody had sat. This did not start with the car. Whatever this was, it did not start with the car. I set the phone face down on my stomach and looked at the water stain on the ceiling and breathed through the ache on the right side of my chest, and I let the numbers arrange themselves into the shape they were already making. They added up. That was the problem. They added up exactly. The night shift changed at 11. I knew this because the sounds in the corridor shifted at exactly that hour. A different rhythm of footsteps, a different register of voices, the particular low-frequency settling of a building moving from one version of its day into another. I had been awake for all of it. I had not tried to sleep. Sleep felt like something I could not afford yet. Not until I understood the shape of what I was lying inside. I thought about Donna's card still tucked under the edge of the water pitcher. 4 words. I had them. You have more people in your corner than you think. People who work night shifts in ICU wards do not say things like that in passing. They say what is necessary and move on. If Donna said it, she said it because it was true, and because she thought I needed to know it was true before I knew why. I filed that alongside everything else and waited for morning. Morning arrived in increments. The light changed first. Then the sounds accelerated. A younger nurse came in to check the machines and change the IV bag. She told me the doctor would be in by 8. She could give me a summary. Broken left clavicle, 2 fractured ribs on the right side, grade 2 concussion. That explained the 11 days and the half-second lag the room still occasionally had between my eyes and my brain. Physical prognosis, good. She delivered this with the careful brightness of someone conveying good news that exists inside a larger context they are not going to address. The doctor arrived at 8:15. He confirmed what the nurse had told me. 6 to 8 weeks of limited arm use. Discharged within 3 days if nothing changed. He said early talk screens were standard in motor vehicle accidents where the cause was unclear. When I asked if it was standard to order one within the first hour of admission, he said he would look into the specifics and get back to me. He did not get back to me. I spent that day going through everything I had. I read the employer letter 4 times, 5 days after my accident, 4 days after my family confirmed receipt of the notification call. The language, recent reports from your family, plural. More than one communication, more than one deliberate contact made while I was unconscious and could not correct whatever was being said. I thought about the word history. A history of substance issues implies something ongoing, something documented, something that people around you have been quietly managing for some time. It does not imply 2 glasses of wine at a birthday dinner. It implies a pattern, and patterns have to be built in advance so that when the moment comes to invoke them, there is something to point to. I lay on the mattress and breathed carefully through the right side of my chest and thought about who had done that work and when they had started. Ryan. The name arrived, the way names arrive when you have been avoiding thinking them. Fully formed, without ceremony. My brother Ryan is 2 years older than me. He has been the one with potential for as long as I can remember. Not a characterization I invented. It was my father's phrase, used often enough in my childhood that I absorbed it as simply the way things are. Ryan has potential. Ryan is going places. Ryan just needs the right opportunity. The opportunities came and the right moments came, and what came together, consistently and without exception, was debt. Not spectacular debt. Not the kind that makes a story, just the steady, accumulating kind. A development deal that needed more capital than the investors provided. A property bought high and sitting unsold. A business loan taken against assets that turned out to be worth less on paper than they were in the conversation where Ryan described them. Each time, our parents covered it. Not all of it. Enough to keep the thing from fully collapsing. My mother would say they were protecting the family. My father would say Ryan just needed more time. I would say nothing, because in our family, saying nothing was the price of being present. 8 months ago, Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the four of us around the table. My father was talking about his retirement accounts the way he occasionally did when he felt the need to review where things stood. As he talked, Ryan started tapping his wedding ring against the edge of the table. I had seen that habit before. A small, repetitive motion, almost inaudible. Ryan did it when he was doing math in his head, calculating something he was not going to share out loud. He had done it through 2 dinners when he was working up to asking our parents for the first loan. He had done it the night he announced his engagement. Every time there was something underneath the surface of what he was saying that was more important than what he was saying. He had done it while our father talked about retirement accounts. I had noticed it and thought nothing of it, the way I had spent a lifetime noticing things and thinking nothing of them, because thinking something of them would have meant saying something, and saying something was not how our family worked. I lay in the hospital bed and understood, in the slow, deliberate way I always understood things I had been trying not to understand, that the tapping had meant something, that I had been too well trained in silence to ask what. 3 days later, I was discharged. The doctor signed the paperwork at 10. A physical therapist left me a printed exercise sheet. I put it in the pocket of my clothes from the night of the accident, laundered by someone at some point, smelling of industrial detergent and something faintly wrong underneath it. I called a car. My colleague Thierry from one of my audit clients had texted twice during my stay, both times brief and without pressure. I answered now. I told her I was being discharged and did not know where I was going. She responded in 4 minutes with her address and the words, "Spare room is yours." I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment before I could move. At the door of the hospital, I stopped. The exit faced a parking lot, a street, the city continuing in its indifferent, ordinary way. Somewhere out there was my apartment. Somewhere out there was the intersection where my car had been hit by a vehicle that had not stopped. Somewhere out there were my parents and my brother, who had been notified on day 1 and had chosen, for 11 days, to let me lie in a room by myself and wait. I walked outside. Terry lived 20 minutes away in a neighborhood of small, neat houses with front porches and window boxes just beginning to come into early spring color. She met me at the door with tea already made. She showed me the spare room, small, with a window that looked out onto a back garden, and left me alone in it. I sat on the edge of the spare bed and took out my phone. In March, 2 months before the accident, I had done my parents' taxes. I had been doing their taxes for 6 years, since my father retired early, and the accounts became complicated enough that my mother decided paying an accountant was unnecessary when she had a daughter who worked with numbers. One of the tolls I paid to remain in good standing in a family where being useful was the condition of belonging. I pulled up the folder on my laptop. Terry had retrieved it from my apartment with my spare key. I went through the March documents looking for the thing I had noted at the time and set aside. It took me 11 minutes. An outflow in February, a premium payment to an insurance company I did not recognize, not the company my parents had always used. A different name, a few $100s, the kind of amount that disappears into a household budget without leaving much of a mark. I had flagged it mentally as a policy renewal I was not familiar with and moved on. There was a reason to look at it now. I wrote down the company name, the payment amount, the date. I looked at the date for a long time. February, 3 months before my accident. I opened a new document. I typed what I had. The employer letter, dated. The talk screen, ordered within the first hour. The substance history, provided by family before I could speak. The missed calls, clustered in the first 2 days and then stopped. The empty room. The empty chair. I typed, the premium payment in February. Unknown insurer. Reason unknown. I typed, Ryan tapping his ring at the dinner table while Dad talked about retirement accounts. I sat back and thought about the word history again, about how much work it takes to build one, about how far in advance you have to start. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. It was a woman from my company's HR department. The information had been provided approximately 10 days ago. I had been in the hospital for 1 day. I had been unconscious. I said, I would like to formally contest this process. She said there was a procedure for that, in the tone of someone who has watched the procedure accomplish very little for the person on the other end. Someone from HR would be in touch with the relevant forms. I thanked her and ended the call. They had made 2 calls on day 1. One to confirm they knew I was in the hospital. One to my employer to start building the record, the timeline of it, the deliberateness of it. One action following another with the kind of purposeful order that does not happen by accident. Nothing about this had happened by accident. I closed the laptop and lay back and breathed through the tight ache on the right side of my chest and waited for the specific quality of calm that comes to me when I have found the discrepancy in the accounts and know, with absolute certainty, that I am going to find out where it leads. It arrived, slow and cold and entirely mine. I searched for the number Detective Marcus Webb had left with the hospital. He answered on the second ring. I told him my name. I told him I was the victim of the hit and run from 11 days ago. I said, I do not believe it was an accident. A short pause. The kind that is not surprise exactly, more like recalibration. He said, what makes you say that? I said, I drove that route every Tuesday. Same time, same lane, 3 years without variation. He said he would look at the file again and be in touch. He did not ask me why I thought someone would want to hurt me. He did not ask about enemies or conflicts or anyone who wished me harm. He asked none of those questions, and the fact that he asked none of them told me that some version of this thought had already occurred to him, that the file had something in it he had not yet found a reason to pursue, and that my call had just given him one. I ended the call and looked at the window. Terry's back garden going from afternoon into evening, light falling across the early spring beds in long, flat strips. Ordinary. All of it is perfectly ordinary. I thought about the premium payment in February, about what an insurance policy looks like when you take it out on someone who does not know you have done it. About my father's phrase, Ryan has potential. About what potential looks like when it has run out of time and runs out of options and is looking at the one asset it has not yet found a way to liquidate. I closed my eyes. I did not sleep, but I stayed very still and let the shape of everything arrange itself in the dark behind my eyelids, and I looked at it without flinching. It was worse than I had let myself think. Webb called back the next morning. I was at Terry's kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had made myself, my left arm still in the soft brace the physical therapist had fitted before discharge. My laptop was open. I had been in it since 6, reading through the February tax documents again, letting the premium payment to the unfamiliar insurer sit in the middle of the spreadsheet the way a wrong number always sits, with a kind of stillness around it that the correct numbers don't have. My phone lit up and Webb's name appeared. I answered before the second ring. He said he had reviewed the file. The collision had been classified as a hit and run pending identification of the second vehicle. Traffic cameras at the intersection had been pulled in the initial investigation. The footage from the nearest camera was partial, the angle catching the aftermath of the impact rather than the moment itself, and the second vehicle was visible only as it was leaving the scene. No plate, no make confirmed. The case had been placed in a holding status. I asked if there were other cameras in the vicinity. He said the initial sweep had covered the standard radius. I asked what the standard radius was. He said 2 blocks. I said, the building on the corner of Marchfield and Dunbar has a private security camera on its east-facing exterior. I know this because I audited that building's property management accounts 14 months ago, and the camera installation was a line item in the second quarter maintenance budget. It is mounted above the second floor and angled toward the street. If the second vehicle entered from the Dunbar side, that camera would have caught it. A silence. The kind that is a person writing something down. He said he would look into it. He said, Ms. Calloway, is there anyone in your life who would have reason to want you harmed? I looked at the premium payment on the screen. February. The insurer's name written on a folded piece of paper under the corner of the laptop. I said, I have a theory I am not ready to share until I have more information to support it. When I have it, you will be the first call I make. He said, don't go looking for things on your own. I said, I am a forensic bookkeeper. Looking at documents is not investigation, it is my job. He said, Ms. Calloway. I said, I will call you when I have something. I ended the call and went looking for one thing. I already knew what it was. I called the insurer whose name appeared on the February payment. 2 automated menus and 1 hold period before I reached a supervisor. He confirmed a policy on file associated with my name and social security number. Named beneficiaries, my parents, jointly, established 4 months prior. I asked for the origination date. He gave it to me. I wrote it down. 4 months ago, 1 month before the February premium payment in my parents' accounts. The policy had been in existence before the payment I had found, which meant there were earlier payments I had not seen because I had only been given documents from the current tax year. I asked for the date on which the policyholder consent had been signed. He said he would need to verify my identity before providing that level of detail. I said, I understand. I would like to initiate a formal inquiry into whether the policyholder consent on this policy was in fact signed by me. He said, are you alleging fraud? I said, I am asking a question about documentation. If the documentation is in order, there is no problem. If it is not in order, I would like to know. He said someone from the insurer's compliance department would be in contact within 3 business days. I thanked him and set the phone down. Terry had left for work at 7:30. She had pressed a spare key into my hand at the door and said only, help yourself to whatever you need. There is soup in the fridge. Do not do anything that is going to hurt your shoulder. The look that accompanied the shoulder instruction had been aimed specifically at the laptop. She was not wrong. I sat at the kitchen table and built the document I would eventually come to think of as the master file. A clean spreadsheet with 4 columns: date, event, source, status. I started with what I could confirm independently of any other person's testimony: the accident, dated, sourced to the hospital admission record; the employer letter, dated, sourced to the letter itself; the HR call, dated, noted from my own record; the February premium payment, dated, sourced to my copy of my parents' tax documents; the policy origination date provided verbally by the insurer, status pending written confirmation. Everything else went into the inferred column: the top screen timing, the substance history provided by family, the calls to my employer on day 1, the shape of the thing I was beginning to see. I worked for 4 hours without stopping. The coffee went cold. I made another cup and let it go cold too. Shortly after noon, Terry's daughter Maya came home for lunch. She was 16 and had her mother's directness and none of her mother's caution about exercising it. She made herself a sandwich and sat at the other end of the table and watched me type for a few minutes. She said, are you actually working right now? I said, yes. She said, while you are literally recovering from an accident. I said, the work is related to the accident. She seemed to find this acceptable. She ate her sandwich and scrolled her phone and then held it out to me, almost casually, the way teenagers hold out phones when they want to show you something and have already decided it is only mildly interesting. She said, is that your mom? I looked at the screen. It was a Facebook post from a woman I recognized vaguely, someone from my parents' church. She had commented on a photograph. In the comment she had written, you all look so wonderful, so glad you got this time away. The photograph showed the deck of a cruise ship, blue water behind it. The kind of flat, brilliant blue that exists in the Caribbean in late spring when the light is at the right angle. 3 people. The image was small enough that the faces were slightly compressed, but one of the figures was wearing a red cardigan I recognized with absolute certainty. My mother had owned that cardigan for years. She wore it every time the weather was mild enough to not require a real coat, and she wanted to feel dressed without being cold. The photograph had been posted 4 days ago. 4 days ago I had been in the hospital. Day 7 of my 11-day stay. I handed the phone back to Maya. I said thank you very casually, the way you say thank you when something has just gone through you like a current and you are not ready to let that be visible. She finished her sandwich and went back to school, and I sat in the kitchen alone and moved one item from inferred to confirmed. Family was traveling while I was hospitalized. Confirmed, social media. I wrote underneath it, red cardigan, mother, cruise ship, Caribbean. Day 7. Then, Ryan also present, based on figure in photograph. Pending clearer image. I submitted a formal written request to the insurer's compliance department and sent an email to Webb with the Marchfield and Dunbar building address and the property management contact. I wrote, this may not be in the original evidence sweep. It would be worth checking. Then I called my mother. I had been making myself wait until I had enough in front of me to understand what her answers meant. Calling too early, before the compliance department came back to me, meant giving her information I had not yet confirmed. I dialed. She answered on the second ring. She had seen my name and chosen to answer. That was itself a piece of information. Her voice was warm, fully warm. The warmth turned all the way up, the voice she used at church events and at the charity board meetings she had sat on for 20 years. She said, "Nora, sweetheart, we have been so worried." I said, "Have you?" A pause. "Small enough that if you were not listening for it, you would miss it." I was listening for it. She said, "Of course we have. This has been the most terrible thing. Are you home? Are you resting?" I said, "I am not home. I want to ask you about an insurance policy." The warmth in her voice did not disappear. It became careful. The warmth stayed at exactly the same level, which is more difficult than letting it drop. She said, "I don't know what you mean." I said, "I found a premium payment in your February accounts, an insurer I don't recognize. Do you want to tell me about it?" She said, "Nora, I really don't know what you're referring to. Your father handles all of that. You know I have never been good with the financial details. My father handles all of that." A redirection so practiced it arrived without effort. I said, "The policy is in my name. The beneficiaries are you and Dad. It was established 4 months ago." A silence. Longer than the others and different in quality, not the silence of someone constructing an answer, the silence of someone deciding how much the answer they have been holding on to needs to change now that they understand what I know. She said, "I really don't know what you're talking about, Nora. I think the accident has been very hard on you, and I think you need to rest. Ryan said you might be struggling." Ryan said, present tense. He had been in contact with her recently enough that the conversation was still current. I said, "When did he tell you I might be struggling?" She said, "I don't remember exactly. Sometime this week." This week, after my discharge, after I had been awake and capable of asking questions for 3 days. I said, "I am going to find out what the policy says regardless of whether you tell me. I would rather hear it from you." She said, "I'm going to have to go, sweetheart. I love you. Please rest." The call ended. I set the phone on the table. "Ryan is very worried about you. He had not called me once in 11 days. He had not sent a single text. He had been on a cruise ship in the Caribbean on day 7 of my hospitalization." I picked up the phone and wrote to the compliance department, adding one specific request: the exact date on which the policyholder consent had been signed. Not the origination date, the signature date. The date on which someone had put a name to a document agreeing to be insured by a policy that would pay out to my parents in the event of my death. I sent the email and looked at the master file. The phone rang before I could close the laptop. "Webb," he said. "Miss Calloway, I need you to come in." His voice had changed since the morning call. It had the quality of a voice that has just been given a reason to change. I said, "Did you find the camera?" He said, "We found the camera." A stillness moved through me, starting at the base of my throat and spreading outward. I said, "What does it show?" He said, "I would prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I said, "I can come in this afternoon." A pause. Then, 3 o'clock. I said, "I will be there." I ended the call and moved the camera from the inferred column to status pending. I looked at the whole document. All the rows, all the dates, all the careful sources. The details were coming now one by one faster than I could organize them, and each one was landing exactly where I expected it to land. That was the worst possible thing they could do, because it meant I had not been wrong. I closed the laptop, I went to the window and looked out at the garden. The afternoon light was pale and thin, and entirely indifferent to the fact that a woman was standing at a kitchen window in a house that was not her own, with a fractured clavicle and a cracked phone and a spreadsheet full of facts that were adding up into a shape she had not yet allowed herself to name out loud. I named it now. Not out loud, in the part of my mind where I keep the confirmed column. The column reserved for things I can prove. I moved it out of order. I was not done building the case, but I was done pretending there was another explanation. Webb's office was on the 4th floor of the district precinct building, a room that had the particular quality of a space that is used for thinking rather than for show. No framed commendations on the wall. A whiteboard with something erased, but not completely, the ghost of a diagram still visible underneath the streaks. 2 chairs on the visitor side of the desk, both slightly mismatched, as though they had been collected from other rooms over time, rather than ordered together. a window that looked out onto the building's interior courtyard, which contained a parking structure and nothing else. Webb was younger than I had expected from his voice. Early 40s, maybe. He had the build of someone who had played a sport seriously at one point and had since converted the habit into something more sustainable. He stood when I came in and shook my hand and looked at the brace on my left arm without commenting on it, which I appreciated. He did not offer pleasantries. He sat down, opened a folder on his desk, and turned his laptop so I could see the screen. He said, "I want to show you something before I explain what I think it means. I want your reaction before I give you any context." I said, "All right." He played the footage. The camera on the Marchfield and Dunbar building had a wider angle than I had remembered from the property management documents. It caught not just the east-facing wall of the building, but a significant portion of the street leading to the intersection. And it caught it clearly because the building's exterior lights were motion-activated and had triggered at exactly the right moment. The timestamp in the lower left corner of the frame showed 7:22 in the evening. I watched myself drive through the intersection in my car. I recognized the car before I recognized myself. A gray sedan, 4 years old, with a small dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident the previous winter. I watched it enter the intersection from the south, moving at a normal speed, no hesitation. Then I watched a second vehicle enter the frame from a side street to the east. It did not enter the intersection because it was traveling through it. It entered the intersection from a stationary position. I could see this because for exactly 2 seconds before it moved, it was still, parked or idling on the side street, waiting, and then it accelerated. Not the acceleration of a driver who has misjudged a light or failed to see a car in their path, the acceleration of a vehicle that has selected a target and is closing the distance between itself and that target as quickly as the geometry of the street will allow. The impact happened in the right side of the frame, partially obscured by the intersection signal post. I watched my car absorb the hit and move sideways and come to rest against the opposite curb. The second vehicle reversed, briefly visible as it pulled back from the wreckage. Then it turned and left the frame in the direction from which it had come. The whole thing took 11 seconds. Webb stopped the footage. I looked at the frozen frame on the screen, my car against the curb. The intersection empty again, as if nothing had happened. My right hand was flat on my thigh. I had put it there at some point during the footage without noticing. I pressed it against my leg and felt the pressure and kept my eyes on the screen. Webb said, "The second vehicle held position for approximately 90 seconds before you entered the intersection. We can see this on the wider angle starting from the 7:20 timestamp. It was waiting." I said, "Has the vehicle been identified?" He said, "We have a partial plate from a witness statement that was in the original file but was not followed up on, 3 letters. We are running it now against DMV records cross-referenced with the geographical area. It takes time." I said, "What does the original file say about the cause of the collision?" He said, "The original file classifies it as a hit and run, cause undetermined, pending identification of the second vehicle. There is a note from the initial responding officer that the collision appeared consistent with a failure to yield." I said, "That is not what that footage shows." He said, "No, it is not." He said, "I want to hear the theory you mentioned on the phone." I said, "I believe there is a life insurance policy on me that was established approximately 4 months ago without my knowledge or consent. The named beneficiaries are my parents. I have initiated a formal inquiry with the insurer's compliance department regarding the authenticity of the policyholder consent signature. I believe the collision was intended to trigger the policy. I believe the substance history provided to the hospital on the day of my admission was intended to support a narrative that would make an alternative cause of death plausible. I believe the calls made to my employer on the same day were intended to establish a public record of instability that would make the alternative narrative easier to sustain." Webb wrote. He wrote for longer than the sentences required. He said, "Who do you believe is responsible?" I said, "I have a theory. I am not ready to name people until I have the policy documentation." He said, "Miss Calloway, if what you are describing is accurate, you are describing an attempted homicide. That is not a matter of documentation. That is a matter for this department." I said, I understand that. I am not trying to investigate it myself. I am trying to give you what I find when I find it, because I am better positioned than you are to understand what the financial documents mean when they arrive. He said, I am opening a formal investigation. I need you to forward me everything you have. Everything, not the edited version. Everything. I said, I will send it tonight, he said. And I need you to tell me if you have any contact from the people you suspect. Any contact at all. I said, my mother called me this morning. I told him what she had said. I told him about Ryan being worried and the present tense of it and what that implied about the timing of the communication between them. Webb wrote it down. I drove back to Terry's house and sent him the master file, every row, every column, every note I had written to myself in the margins. Then I sat in the spare room and waited. I waited 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, the compliance department called. She confirmed the policy had been established 4 months prior. She confirmed the beneficiaries. She confirmed the premium payment history, which began 3 months ago and was current. Then she said that the internal review of the policyholder consent documentation had identified 2 points of inconsistency with the signature on file for Nora Calloway in the insurer's records. I asked her what that meant in plain terms. She said that the signature on the consent form did not appear to be authentic. She said it in the careful, passive voice of institutional language, the way organizations say things that mean everything while technically committing to nothing. The signature did not appear to be authentic. Not, someone forged your name. Not, a person you trusted signed a document agreeing to profit from your death. I said, I understand. I would like a written copy of those findings sent to my email address and also to Detective Marcus Webb at the district precinct. I have a case number. Do you have a pen? She took the case number. She said the written findings would be sent within 24 hours. She said the insurer would also be contacting their own fraud investigation unit. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat on the edge of the spare bed and let the full weight of it arrive. Someone had signed my name to a document consenting to my death. Not a stranger. Not a random financial criminal who had found my information and decided to exploit it. Someone who had access to my signature, someone who had seen my handwriting enough times on birthday cards and tax documents and the loan guarantee I had co-signed for Ryan 4 years ago when his first development deal needed a second name on the paperwork, to be able to approximate it closely enough that only a professional analysis caught the difference. Someone I had sat across from at dinner tables, someone I had handed Christmas gifts to, someone who had called me sweetheart on the phone 2 days ago with the warmth turned all the way up. I called Webb and told him the compliance findings were coming and to expect the written report within 24 hours. He said his team was working. He said, stay where you are and do not contact the subjects. I said, I understand. 2 days later, the HR video call came. A woman named Linda, mid-50s, the careful, overperformed warmth of someone whose training sessions had left her more confident than genuine. She said the company valued my contributions twice in the first 4 minutes. She said the wellness review had been initiated in response to a pattern of behavior over the preceding several months. I said I would like to formally contest this review. The source of the information was my mother. She called your office on the day I was admitted to the hospital following a collision that is now being investigated as a deliberate vehicular assault. The information she provided was false and was fabricated by individuals who are now the subjects of an active police investigation. I would like the false information removed from my file. I will expect a response within 5 business days. Linda said she would need to consult the legal department. I said, of course. She ended the call. I closed the laptop and lay back on the spare bed and looked at the crack in the ceiling that ran from the light fixture toward the window. That language, that specific architecture of implication, a pattern over several months, did not arrive fully formed from a frightened parent calling from the side of a swimming pool on a cruise ship. It had been constructed in advance, built the same way the insurance policy had been built, over enough time to look like something with a history. I pressed my right hand flat against the bedspread and felt the texture of the fabric under my fingers and focused on that. I thought about Ryan at the dinner table 8 months ago, the ring against the table, tap, 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 the the slow, patient calculation of a man who has run out of other options and found one more. He had decided 8 months ago, or maybe earlier, and he had laid the groundwork with the patience of someone who believed he was the only person in the room capable of long-range thinking. He was wrong about that. He had spent 34 years watching me smooth things over and say nothing and keep the peace, and he had made the reasonable inference that a person who does those things is a person who does not look. I had always been looking. I had just never had a reason to show him. My phone rang. "Unknown number," I answered. It was my father. His voice had the quality it always had, a kind of practiced mild pleasantness. He asked how I was feeling. He said he and my mother had been thinking of me. I said, "Dad, I need to ask you about the secondary policy." A silence. Not the silence my mother had produced, the careful, managed silence of someone who has prepared for the question. A different silence, smaller. The silence of someone who has been carrying something and has just heard it named. He said, "What secondary policy?" His voice had changed. Something had left it, some structural element the pleasantness had been resting on, and without it, the pleasantness thinned. I said, "The policy you have maintained on my life for 7 years. The one that names you as beneficiary, the one whose renewal you paid 3 months ago." He said, "Nora, I think we should talk about this in person." I said, "I think you should speak to a lawyer before we do that. A detective named Webb is opening a formal investigation into what happened to me, and the insurance documentation is going to be part of it." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that I would have thought the call had dropped if I could not hear his breathing. He said, "Ryan told us it would be fine." I held the phone against my ear and looked at the crack in the ceiling and let that sentence sit in the room with me. Ryan told us it would be fine. My father had known. He had not planned the specific mechanics of it, but he had known something was being planned, and he had accepted Ryan's assurance and gone on a cruise and maintained his policy and waited. I said, "It is not fine, Dad. Nothing about this is going to be fine." I ended the call. I put the phone face down on the bed and lay still and breathed through the tight ache in my right side that was still there. Still the memory of what had happened to my ribs when a vehicle that had been waiting for me drove into my car at an intersection I had crossed 100 times. I had done their taxes. I had co-signed Ryan's loan. I had made myself small at family dinners and kept the peace and smoothed over every crack that appeared, including the one in February when I found the premium payment and categorized it and moved on, because looking at it directly would have cost something I was not yet ready to spend. That habit had nearly been the end of me. I thought about Donna in her off-shift clothes pressing her number into my hand at the hospital door, about her voice on the phone after midnight answering on the second ring. I had been waiting for someone to ask. I picked up the phone. I turned it over and looked at the cracked screen and the single diagonal line running from the upper left corner toward the center. I opened a new document. At the top, I typed 4 words, "What I can prove." I did not sleep that night. Not because I could not, because I did not want to. There was a particular clarity to the thinking I was doing that had not been available to me since I woke up in the hospital room, and I did not want to interrupt it by going unconscious. I sat at Terry's kitchen table with the laptop open and the overhead light on, and a 3rd cup of coffee that went cold the same way the others had, and I worked. The document said, "What I can prove" at the top, and I filled it the way I fill every audit document I have ever built, starting with the bedrock and building upward. Only what I can source. Only what has an independent reference I did not create myself. I was a party to this case, which meant every defense attorney in a courtroom would spend significant energy trying to make the jury see my evidence as something I had assembled to serve my own version of events. Everything in this document needed to be something that existed before I touched it, or something confirmed by a source that had no relationship to me. The Compliance Department findings, independent source, written report incoming, 2 signature inconsistencies identified by professional analysis. The traffic camera footage, independent source, private security camera on a building I had audited but had not operated or maintained, footage retrieved and held by Webb's department. The premium payment in February, sourced to my copy of my parents' tax documents. Documents prepared using records my parents themselves provided. the employer letter, sourced to the letter itself, bearing the company's letterhead and a date that preceded my discharge by 6 days. The HR call, sourced to my own record, corroborated by the HR manager's confirmation that a report had been received from my family. The partial plate from the witness statement, sourced to the original police file, not to me. The Facebook photograph. I had not captured it myself. I opened Facebook, found my mother's profile, and the photograph was still there. My mother in the red cardigan, her hand on the railing of a cruise ship deck, the flat, brilliant Caribbean blue behind her. My father next to her, slightly turned away, his hand in his pocket the way he always stands in photographs, as though he is waiting for something to be over. And to my mother's right, slightly closer to the camera, Ryan. His face was clear enough. I took a screenshot, noted the date and time stamp, noted the name of the person who had posted it. I wrote in the document, family photographed on cruise ship, Caribbean, day 7 of hospitalization. Source, public Facebook post, third-party account, screenshot captured. Ryan Calloway confirmed present. I looked at Ryan's face for a moment. The particular smile he used in photographs that had always read to me as performance rather than feeling. The smile of a man who has learned to produce the expression that good moments require. I closed the photograph and kept working. By 2 a.m, I had 14 rows in the confirmed column and 4 rows in a new column labeled Needs Verification. I also had, for the first time since I had started building this document, a clear picture of what I still did not have. I did not have the identity of the driver. I did not have direct evidence connecting Ryan to the arrangement of the collision rather than just to its financial beneficiary structure. What I had was circumstantial, the debt, the timeline, the policy, the photograph. A good defense attorney could dismantle circumstantial. Webb had the partial plate. Webb had the footage. Those were his pieces to find. What I could do was make sure that when he found them, everything I had was so thoroughly documented that the defense attorney had nothing to work with on my side of the case. I worked until 4. Then I closed the laptop and went to the spare room and lay down on the bed with my clothes on and looked at the ceiling crack until the light from the window changed and Terry's alarm went off upstairs. She came downstairs and paused at the kitchen doorway. She said, "Did you sleep at all?" I said, "A little." She said, "Nora?" I said, "I know." She made coffee without asking and sat down across the table. She said, "What can I do?" I said, "I need to call Donna this morning. I need to ask her something that is going to put her in a difficult position, and I need to make sure I do it right." She said, "Do you want me to go upstairs?" I said, "Yes. Thank you." She took her coffee and went upstairs, and I sat at the table and thought about how to do this. The thing about asking someone to do the right thing is that you can only ask it once. Ask it badly and you lose them. And once you have lost them, the information they have goes with them, because a reluctant witness is not a witness. A reluctant witness is a liability. I dialed at 7:15. She answered the way she had answered before, without performance, just her name and a brief silence that meant, "Go ahead." I said, "Donna, I need to ask you something, and I want you to know before I ask it that whatever your answer is, I am grateful for everything you have already done." She said, "Ask it." I said, "When I was admitted, you were on shift. I would like to know what you observed about my family's behavior during the period I was unconscious, not the official record, what you personally observed." A silence, longer than her usual silences. I did not fill it. She said, "How much do you know?" I said, "Enough to have opened a formal police investigation. Enough that what you tell me will support something that is already moving, not start something from nothing." Another silence. Then the sound of a door closing, the ambient sound of wherever she was shifting as she moved somewhere more private. She said, "I kept notes. My right hand went still on the table." She said, "Personal ones, not in the official file. A spiral notebook I keep in my locker." I started writing things down on day 2 because something felt wrong, and I have been doing this job long enough to trust that feeling. She said, on day 2, a man identifying himself as my brother had come to the nurse's station and asked questions about my prognosis, not the questions family members usually ask. His questions were about time frames, about what the range of outcomes looked like at this stage. She said he asked once about the approximate time it would take for a patient in my situation to be declared. He used the word declared, not the word recover. I looked at the window. The morning light was coming through fully now, ordinary and flat. She said on day 3 my mother came in and spoke to the floor supervisor. She told him I had a history of using prescription medications recreationally in the context of discussing pain management, suggesting my medication tolerance was different from a normal patient's. The supervisor noted it. Donna saw him note it. She said, "That is when I started writing things down." On day 4, my father came in briefly. He had not gone to my room. He had gone to the administration desk and asked about the process for requesting copies of medical records for insurance purposes. Insurance purposes. Donna said, "I wrote it all down. The dates, the times, who said what to whom. I am not a lawyer. I know my notebook is not official documentation, but I wrote it down." I said, "Donna, would you be willing to give a statement to the detective assigned to my case?" The silence this time was the longest of any of them. I could hear her breathing, the small ambient sounds of wherever she was, a place with its own life separate from this conversation. She said, "I have been waiting for someone to ask me that since day 4. I closed my eyes for a moment. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when it's done." I called Webb immediately after. I told him about Donna, about the notebook, about what it contained. He went quiet in the focused way. He went quiet when something significant had entered the file. He said, "That is important." He also said, "The partial plate cross-reference came back with a workable list. The footage and the plate are moving toward the same place. A few days, maybe less." I thanked him and ended the call and opened the laptop and went back to the document. I had been sitting in the spare room of someone else's house for nearly 2 weeks. A fractured clavicle and a cracked phone and no income, and a formal wellness review on my employment file, and a family who had spent 8 months building the architecture of my death. I had all of that. I also had a notebook a woman had been keeping since day 4. I had a compliance report confirming a forged signature. I had traffic camera footage showing a vehicle that had been waiting for me. I had a master file with 14 confirmed rows. I sent Maya a text asking if the Facebook post was still public and if she could confirm the date stamp. She responded in 3 minutes with a screenshot. I added it to the confirmed column with her name as source. 14 confirmed rows had become 16. I called the insurer and asked to be connected to the compliance department. The written report had been sent that morning. I checked my email. It was there. 3 pages of analysis in the careful, measured language of professional fraud examiners. And at the bottom of the 3rd page, a conclusion that said the signature on the policyholder consent form presented 2 statistically significant inconsistencies with the verified signature sample on file and could not be confirmed as authentic. I forwarded it to Webb with 2 words in the subject line, "Written confirmation." Then I sat with the email open on the screen and thought about what it actually meant. Not in the legal sense, in the human sense. Someone had sat somewhere and picked up a pen and looked at my name and signed it. They had practiced it. You do not sign someone else's name on a legal document without practicing first. They had looked at examples of my signature, perhaps the loan guarantee from 4 years ago, perhaps the tax documents, perhaps a birthday card. They had practiced the specific way I make the N in Nora, the way my C has a particular curl at the bottom from years of writing it quickly, the loops I compress when I am moving fast through a page. They had practiced my name in order to sign away my life. I closed the email. The 4 rows in the needs verification column each had a clear next step. The driver was Webb's partial plate in progress. The direct Ryan to collision connection required whoever the driver was connected to, also Webb's. The HR call record needed a formal request to the company, which I sent immediately, CC'd to Webb's department email. My father's secondary policy would surface when the fraud unit ran my name through the industry database. Everything remaining was in other people's hands. The only thing I could do was wait, and waiting is not something I do well. But the document was as complete as I could make it from where I was sitting, and I knew it, and that was a different kind of stillness from anything I had felt in 2 weeks. I closed the laptop. I went upstairs and knocked on Terry's door. She was getting ready for work. I said, "I sent everything to Webb. The document is as complete as I can make it from this end." She said, "So now what?" I said, "Now I wait." She said, "Then eat something, actual food, and sleep, and let the detective do his job." I ate toast at the table without opening the laptop. I drank the coffee. I looked out at the garden and let myself, for the first time, believe that what I had was going to be enough. My phone buzzed. Nora, it's Donna. I gave my statement to Detective Webb this morning. I gave him the notebook. I wanted you to know before you heard it through official channels. I read it twice. I set the phone face up on the table and looked at the ceiling and felt the specific sensation of a thing shifting into place, a number that has been in the wrong column moving to where it belongs, the particular satisfaction of an account that is beginning finally to balance. I wrote back, "Thank you." That is all I had. It was enough. I finished the toast and went to the spare room and lay down on the bed, and for the first time in 2 weeks, I let myself close my eyes with the intention of actually sleeping. I was asleep in 4 minutes. I know this because when Webb called, the timestamp said 2:47 in the afternoon, which meant I had been asleep for more than 6 hours. 6 hours. I had not given myself since the night before the accident, since the Tuesday evening when I had driven downtown for a client meeting and afterward walked to my car in the cold and headed for the intersection where someone had been waiting. I answered. Webb said, "Miss Calloway." The partial plate cross-reference came back. "We have a name. The registered owner of the vehicle has financial ties to one of your brother's development partnerships." I did not say anything. He said, "I think you know what this means for the investigation." I said, "Yes." He said, "I need you to come in tomorrow morning." He said, "Miss Calloway, you did good work." I said, "I had good material to work with." I ended the call and lay back and felt the weight of everything I had been carrying for the past 2 weeks settle differently on me. Not lighter exactly, more evenly distributed. The weight of a thing you are no longer carrying alone. Outside the window, the small tree at the far corner of the garden was catching the late afternoon light in its new pale leaves, the tentative green of things that have decided to continue. I watched it until the light changed. Then I got up and went to the kitchen and opened the laptop and moved the 4 rows in the needs verification column. 3 of them went to confirmed. The 4th one I left where it was. Driver connected to Ryan. Pending formal charges. It would not be pending for long. I looked at the document. 20 confirmed rows, a complete account, every number in its correct column, every source verified, every date cross-referenced against an independent record. The kind of document that holds up because it was built to hold up, because the person who built it understood that the truth is only as strong as the structure that carries it. I had built the structure. The rest was someone else's work to finish. I was ready for them to finish it. Webb's office looked the same as it had the first time I sat in it. The mismatched chairs, the ghost of the erase diagram on the whiteboard, the window onto the parking structure where nothing changed from one visit to the next. A space that does not perform itself, that simply exists for the work that happens inside it. Webb came in with a folder and a second person I had not met. A woman about my age named Carver who worked in the financial crimes unit and who had the particular focus quality of someone who has spent years looking at numbers and has learned to read them the way other people read faces. She shook my hand, sat in the second chair along the wall, and said very little for the first part of the meeting. She was there to listen to what I knew before she told me what she knew. Webb opened his folder and said, "I want to go through this in order. Some of what I am going to tell you will confirm things you already know. Some of it will be new." He said, "The vehicle in the Marchfield and Dunbar footage has been traced to a man named Troy Bassett, 41 years old. Contractor, primarily residential and light commercial construction. Documented business relationship with your brother's development company going back approximately 3 years. On the second project they worked together, there is a disputed payment. Your brother's company owes Bassett a significant outstanding balance, in informal dispute for 14 months. I said nothing. Webb said, "Bassett was brought in for questioning 2 days ago. His attorney has been in contact with the prosecutor's office." I said, "He is cooperating." Webb said, "I cannot confirm that." He said it in a way that confirmed it. Carver looked up from her folder. She said, "The policy on your life was opened 4 months ago through a licensed agent named Philip Garrett. Garrett's license has been under suspension for the past 6 months following a prior misconduct finding. He should not have been processing new policies. The fact that this policy was processed through him suggests the arrangement was deliberate. People use suspended or compromised agents when they want a transaction to be harder to trace." She said, "We have identified 2 prior payments to Garrett from a personal account associated with your brother. The first payment predates the policy origination by 6 weeks. The second was made the day the policy was finalized. The amounts are below automatic reporting thresholds, which also appears deliberate." She set a page on the desk in front of me. 2 transaction records, dates, amounts, and account number with most digits redacted. She said, "This is what connects your brother to the policy arrangement beyond the circumstantial." I looked at the transaction records. The amounts were small. The kind of small that is calculated, the kind that requires someone who understands how financial monitoring works. He had thought about this. He had not been careless. He had just not accounted for the fact that the person who would eventually be looking at it had spent 12 years finding exactly this kind of thing. I opened my bag and took out the folder I had assembled that morning. I said, in March, 2 months before the accident, I prepared my parents' tax documents. In the February accounts, I found a premium payment to the insurer associated with the fraudulent policy. I categorized it as an unknown renewal at the time and did not follow up. I have my original working copy of those documents. The payment is in the original file. It is not something I added later. I put the document on the desk. Carver leaned forward. She said, "This is your original working file from March." I said, "Yes." Dated, with my client notes in the margin. I have not modified it. Webb said, "You said you wanted to add something else." I said, "The signature on the policyholder consent was forged." The compliance report confirmed 2 points of inconsistency. 4 years ago, I co-signed a loan guarantee for my brother's first development deal. My signature appears 3 times in that document. I believe it was used as a reference. I put the loan guarantee on the desk next to the tax documents. Carver said, "Ms. Calloway, in your professional assessment, what is the complete financial picture of what was being attempted?" I said, "My brother has an outstanding balance with Bassett of approximately $40,000 based on public contract dispute records. He has additional debt exposure from 2 stalled development deals. My parents have provided financial support to him on at least 4 separate occasions over the past 3 years, and their capacity to continue is limited. My father is semi-retired. Their primary assets are their home and their retirement accounts." I said, "The policy on my life carries a benefit of $180,000. That is enough to clear Bassett, fund the most critical outstanding debt, and provide a buffer. It is a specific number. It was not chosen randomly." I said, "The secondary policy my father has maintained on my life for 7 years carries a benefit of $30,000. Whether it was intended to be part of the same plan or simply became, in my brother's thinking, an additional resource, it is part of the financial picture either way." Webb looked at the documents and then at me. He said, "You built all of this yourself." I said, "It is my job." He said, "It is your case." I said, "I understand the difference. I was careful about the difference." He closed his folder. He said, "We are moving toward an arrest. More than one arrest. Days, not weeks. When it happens, it is going to be public. Your name is going to be in a news report." I said, "I know." He said, "Are you prepared for that?" I said, "I do not think preparation is the right word for it, but I am ready." He said, "I need a formal statement. Everything you have told me across all our conversations, in sequence, on the record, today if possible." Carver set a recording device on the desk and said, "Then let's begin." The statement took 2 hours and 14 minutes. I spoke in the same voice I use in client meetings, steady and unhurried. The prosecutor, whose name was Aldridge, joined us 40 minutes in and made notes and asked occasional clarifying questions and otherwise let me go. When I finished, Aldridge looked at me and said, "You were very thorough." I said, "It is my job." He said, "No, this was more than your job." I left the building and stood on the sidewalk in the afternoon air, cool and carrying the smell of a city in early spring. I had expected something large when it was done, some specific, identifiable release. What I felt instead was quieter, the specific quietness of a person who has been carrying a weight over a very long distance and has just set it down in front of the people equipped to deal with it. I had not solved it. I had built the thing that made it solvable. There is a difference, and the difference matters to me. Terry had taken the afternoon off. She was at the kitchen table with her own laptop and a cup of tea and said simply, "Sit down." I made soup. She put a bowl in front of me and sat across from me and did not ask what had happened or how it had gone. She just sat there, present in the uncomplicated way she had been present since the day she had sent me her address in 4 minutes. After a while, she said, "What happens now?" I said, "We wait for Webb to do what he needs to do. Then it becomes something I cannot control. She said, does the process usually work? I said, when the documents are correct, yes. She said, are your documents correct? I said, they are the most correct documents I have ever produced in my life. My phone lit up. Web. The prosecutor's office had reviewed the file and authorized moving forward. 48 hours, Terry said. Then tonight we do not work. We watch something completely mindless, and you sleep in an actual bed at an actual time. She was right not to ask. There was nothing more I could do. The document was filed. The statement was recorded. The footage was in evidence. Donna's notebook was in Webb's custody. The partial plate had led to Troy Bassett, and Troy Bassett had led, through 14 months of disputed invoices and 2 small payments to a suspended insurance agent, directly back to my brother. Every gun I had loaded was in someone else's hands now. I closed the laptop. We watched television until 10. I was asleep on Terry's couch before the second episode finished, and she put a blanket over me and turned the television off, and I slept without dreaming for 9 hours. At 6:47 in the morning, my phone rang. Webb, he said, it happened this morning. Ryan Calloway was taken into custody at his office at 6:15. Your parents are being brought in separately. I wanted you to hear it from me. I sat up on the couch with the blanket still around my shoulders and looked at the pale early morning light coming through Terry's front window and held the phone against my ear and let the sentence exist in the room with me. Ryan Calloway was taken into custody. He said, the Financial Crimes Unit ran your name through the insurance industry database. The secondary policy your father maintained came up. He has been contacted separately. He is cooperating. I said, I know. He said, you knew about the secondary policy. I said, I found it when I was building the document. I added it to the needs verification column. I was waiting for your team to find it through independent channels so that it came from a source that was not me. A silence. Then that was smart. I said, I wanted the document to hold. He said, it held. I thanked him and ended the call. Terry appeared in the kitchen doorway in her robe with her hair undone. She looked at my face and did not ask. She just waited. I said, they arrested Ryan this morning. She crossed the kitchen and sat down on the couch next to me and put her arm around my shoulders, the left one carefully mindful of the clavicle. And she did not say anything, and I did not say anything. And we sat in the early morning quiet while the pale spring light built itself slowly into something that had enough warmth to be felt. After a while she said, what do you need right now? I said, I need to go to my apartment. I have not been home in nearly 3 weeks. She said, I will drive you. I said, you do not have to. She said, I know I do not have to. We did not argue about it. My apartment was exactly as I had left it. The cup on the dish rack, the closet door open a few inches, the book on the nightstand with a receipt still marking my place. The way it had simply waited, holding the shape of an ordinary Tuesday morning while everything else continued at full speed. Terry made tea and threw away the dead succulent. She said, the plant was unsalvageable. I said, I never remembered to water it when it was alive. I changed into my own clothes. We sat at the kitchen table. At 9:15, my phone rang. Webb. Ryan had been charged with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, and insurance fraud. Bassett had entered a formal cooperation agreement, his statement detailed and consistent with everything in the document. Patricia had been charged as a co-conspirator in insurance fraud and obstruction of justice. Gordon had been charged separately in connection with the secondary policy, fraud and failure to disclose, and had come in voluntarily and was cooperating fully. Webb said his formal recommendation included a notation that the financial case was substantially built by the victim herself. I said, thank you. He said, it is accurate. Thank you seems insufficient, but I understand why you said it. My phone lit up again. Ryan's name. I looked at it for 3 full rings. Then I answered. His attorney's voice. My client is prepared to provide full cooperation in exchange for a reduced charge structure. He believes your support of this position would be meaningful to the prosecutor's office. I said, please tell your client that I will be available at the precinct this afternoon as requested by the prosecutor's office. I will not be available for a private conversation. I will not be providing any statement regarding the charge structure for your client. She said, is there anything you would like me to convey to my client? I said, no. I ended the call. Terry said, was that Ryan? I said, his attorney. They wanted me to weigh in on his behalf with the prosecutor. She said, good. She left to give me some time. I sent a brief formal email to my employer's HR department. The individuals who had provided fabricated information about my professional fitness had been charged this morning. I expected the wellness review to be closed and the notation removed from my file within the week. Webb called at 11. Final document, walked through at 2. Ryan had also requested a supervised 5-minute contact. I was under no obligation. I thought about it. Not for long. Terry came back with sandwiches. I ate and listened to her tell me something her daughter had said, something entirely unrelated to any of this. I was grateful for the irrelevance of it. At 1:30, I drove to the precinct. The prosecutor's meeting was in a third-floor conference room. Aldridge, Carver, the lead on the attempted murder case, Webb at the end of the table. They walked me through the document one more time, not because there was anything in it they did not understand, but because there is a difference between reading a document and hearing the person who built it explain the logic of how each piece connects to the next. At 3:15, Aldridge said, I think we have everything we need. I said, there is one more thing. I would like to see my brother, not in the hearing, not with attorneys, 5 minutes, supervised. Webb said, I can arrange that. They brought Ryan into a room on the second floor. A table, 2 chairs, a large window on the north wall that was actually a mirror on the other side, which everyone in the room was aware of and no one mentioned. I sat down on one side of the table. Ryan came in. He looked smaller than I had expected. Not physically. He had always been larger than me. Broader through the shoulders, the kind of presence that fills a room the way certain people do, the ones who have been told their whole lives that the room is waiting for them. But the presence was different now. Some essential structural element of it was gone, the same way my father's voice had lost its structural element on the phone the day I had named the secondary policy. He sat down across from me. He said, Nora. I said nothing. He said, I need you to know that I never wanted this to go the way it went. The original plan was different. It was supposed to be clean. I said, you hired a man to drive a vehicle into my car at an intersection. You knew I would cross at a specific time. You did this because you had taken out an insurance policy on my life and needed my death to access the payout. You had your mother call my employer and fabricate a history of drug use to establish a secondary narrative that would make an accidental death look like an overdose. You had your mother call the hospital before I was conscious and plant the same story in my medical record. You went on a cruise with our parents to establish an alibi, and you posted photographs of it on the internet. I paused. I said, tell me which part of that was supposed to be clean. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at his hands again. I watched him do it, and I watched the ring on his left hand catch the light from the fluorescent fixture above us, and I watched his right index finger begin to move toward it, the old involuntary motion, the slow patient tapping that he did when he was calculating. His finger reached the ring, stopped. He looked up at me, and I could see in his face the precise moment he understood that I had seen it, that I had always seen it. That the silence I had maintained for 32 years at every dinner table and every family gathering had never been the silence of someone who was not watching. I said, I noticed that years ago. The ring. I just never had a reason to say anything about it until now. He said nothing. I said, I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it before the hearing and before whatever your attorney arranges with the prosecutor and before any of the rest of it. I built the case against you, not because I wanted to destroy you, because you tried to kill me, and I am a person who deals in documentation, and this was the documentation I had to build. I did not enjoy it. I did not do it out of anger. I did it because it was the only accurate response to what you did. He said, Nora, I am sorry. I sat with that sentence for a moment, 2 words, each one technically accurate, neither one sufficient. I said, I know you are. You are sorry because it did not work. You might also be sorry because somewhere in you there is still the person who grew up in the same house I did, who knows what this is going to cost everyone, including yourself. I am willing to believe both of those things can be true at the same time, but I need you to understand that neither of them changes anything I have done or anything I am going to do. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I am going to walk out of this room and I am going to let the process run. That is all. You are going to get whatever the evidence supports, and the evidence was built by me, so you will understand if I am confident it is accurate. He said, you were always smarter than I gave you credit for. I said, I know. I stood up. He said, what about Mom and Dad? I looked at him. I said, that is not a conversation I am having with you. I picked up my bag and walked to the door and knocked twice on the frame, and the officer outside opened it. I walked out without looking back. Webb fell into step beside me. At the elevator, he said, that was 5 minutes and 12 seconds. I said, he tapped his ring for the last time in there. I wanted to see it one more time. He said, I note everything, Mrs. Calloway. He held the elevator door. The hearing is at 4. You do not need to be here for it. Go home. I walked out into the afternoon. Cool air, the smell of a city in spring. I was standing in a different place on the sidewalk from the last time I had walked out of this building, and I was not the same person who had stood outside here the first time. Not because anything had been resolved. Nothing was finished. But something was different. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and let it be different. Then I called Terry and said, it is over for today. I saw Ryan, she said. How was that? I thought about his face when he understood I had always been watching. The ring against the table one last time. The specific smallness of a person who has lost the room that was supposed to be waiting for them. I said, it was exactly what I needed it to be. She said, go home. Sleep in your own bed. I will call you tomorrow. I drove past the intersection on Marchfield. I did not plan to. It was not on my usual route home. But my hands took the turn before my brain had registered the intention, the way the body remembers things before the mind catches up. And then I was at the light on Marchfield and Dunbar, stopped at the red, looking at the intersection where it had happened. The intersection looked like an intersection. It looked exactly like what it was, an ordinary junction of two city streets, signal light, crosswalk markings, the building on the corner with its east-facing security camera mounted above the second floor. People were crossing. A delivery truck was double-parked a half-block down. A woman with a stroller was waiting at the opposite corner. The light changed. I drove through. On the other side, the road opened up into the straight stretch that led toward my neighborhood, so familiar that the driving requires no attention and the mind is free to be somewhere else entirely. I let it be somewhere else. I thought about the whiteboard in my hospital room with my name in green marker. I thought about the empty chair. I thought about Donna pressing her number into my hand at the hospital door and the card under the water pitcher with its 4 words in blue ballpoint ink. I thought about Thierry's kitchen at 2 in the morning with the overhead light on and the coffee going cold and the laptop screen showing the confirmed column growing 1 row at a time into something that was going to be enough. I had not known, on that Tuesday evening 3 weeks ago, that I was driving toward something that had been arranged for me. But I had known something was wrong from the moment I saw the date on the whiteboard. I had known it from the empty room and the empty chair. I had known it the way I always know things, not through instinct, but through attention, through the habit of looking at a set of numbers and asking why this one does not belong. I turned onto my street. I parked in front of my building and sat in the car for a moment. Everything in my apartment was exactly as I had left it on a Tuesday morning in late April. The bed was made sufficiently. The closet door opens a few inches. The receipt marking my place in the book on the nightstand. I went inside. The weeks after Ryan's arrest had a particular quality I had not anticipated. I had expected noise. What I got instead was ordered quiet. The quiet of a process running on its own momentum, governed by timelines I had not set and could not accelerate. Court dates were scheduled. Attorneys filed documents. The prosecutor's office sent updates that I read carefully and filed in a folder on my desktop labeled simply Case. Ryan entered a plea agreement 6 weeks after his arrest. 12 years. Webb called to tell me before the formal notice arrived simply and without decoration, and I sat at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear and the word 12 sitting in the room with me. And I thought about what 12 years meant in the architecture of a life, what it added up to, what it removed. His fiancée had left the night of his arrest. His real estate business collapsed inside the first 2 weeks, the development partners making their decision quickly and publicly. The 2 stalled projects became legally complicated in ways that would outlast the criminal case by years. My name appeared in the first paragraph of the main news story. Victim is named Nora Calloway, 32, a forensic bookkeeper. The word victim sat next to my name, and I read it and set it aside, because victim is accurate as a legal category and is not the most complete or most important thing about who I am. Patricia cooperated, as Webb had predicted. She confirmed the insurance policy arrangement, the call to my employer, the substance history narrative to the hospital. 4 years, likely 2, served based on her cooperation and her lack of prior criminal record. My father's case resolved separately. Probation, 3 years. Full restitution. He had cooperated fully from the moment he came in voluntarily. His age and his health and his 30 years of unremarkable tax compliance were factors. They were part of the calculation the system made, and the system was making the calculation I had asked it to make when I built the document and handed it to Webb. I did not attend any of the court proceedings. My role in the case was the document. There is a difference between the work and the spectacle of the work, and I had done the work, and I was not interested in the spectacle. The letter from my father arrived on a Wednesday, forwarded from my old address in a plain white envelope in his handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the specific way he formed his capital N, the forward lean of all his letters as though they are heading somewhere urgently. I held it for a moment. I thought about the man who had driven his daughter to her first day of college and taught her to balance a checkbook and sat across from her at 500 Sunday dinners, and who had ended up maintaining a policy on her life and going on a cruise while she lay in a hospital room with no flowers and an empty chair. I thought about whether reading his explanation would give me something I did not already have. I put the letter in the recycling bin. I did not hesitate. That was the thing I noticed most, the absence of hesitation, the old reflex toward keeping the peace, giving people the benefit of the doubt, past the point where the doubt has earned its benefit. That reflex had been with me my entire life, and it had nearly been the end of me. It was not there. I finished my coffee and went to my desk. The restaurant group file was still on top of the stack where I had left it, the quarterly returns with the third quarter inconsistency I had been halfway through on the Tuesday evening before everything happened. I opened it and found my place. The note I had made in the margin about the line item that did not correspond to the supporting documentation. I picked up my pen and started where I had stopped. My employer's reinstatement letter had arrived 2 weeks after Ryan's arrest. Linda from HR had called personally and used the word deeply twice in the first 60 seconds. I had thanked her. I had not said it was fine because it was not fine, and saying it was fine was the old habit. I had said, I appreciate that. The wellness review notation was removed from my file by the end of the week. It was a Thursday afternoon when I went back to the hospital. Donna was at the nurse's station on the ICU floor, her head down, the cheap blue ballpoint moving across a form with the focused economy of someone doing one task and thinking about the next one. She looked up. She did not perform surprise. She simply looked at me with the same direct quality she had brought to every interaction we had ever had, and she said, "You look better." I said, "I feel better." I said, "Your notebook is in the official case file, cited 4 times. The entries you kept from day 2 are part of what the prosecution built the obstruction charge on. I wanted you to know that specifically." She said, "I heard the charges." I said, "You kept the notebook since day 2. That is a person choosing, on day 2 of someone else's crisis, to pay attention and write it down. I would not have asked you to give the statement if I had not already known you were that kind of person." She said, "How did you know?" "On day 2, I had barely spoken to you." I said, "The card under the water pitcher. The specific way you left it. Someone who leaves a card like that in handwriting that does not explain itself, who says a thing like you have more people in your corner and then walks away without waiting for the response. That is a person who has been watching for longer than the current conversation. That is a person with a notebook. She said you are very observant for someone who was unconscious for 11 days. I said I had a lot to catch up on. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. I said thank you before I left. She said, "You said that already." I said, "I know, I meant it twice." She went back to her form. I walked out through the main entrance of the hospital, which was not the door I had left through on discharge day. That door had been on the side of the building, the one the social worker had walked me to with my plastic bag of personal effects and my laundered clothes. This was the one that faced the street directly, the one that required you to walk out into the city in full daylight without the mediation of a parking lot. I walked out. The afternoon was warm in the particular way of early summer, the heat present enough to be felt on the skin, on the forearms, in the quality of the light on the pavement. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment with my face turned toward it. I drove home, made coffee, and sat down at my desk. I had a new client file, a small accounting firm, a partnership dispute, with a discrepancy in the retained earnings account that neither partner wanted to own, the kind of job where the truth is in the numbers and the numbers do not lie, they only conceal, and concealment only holds until someone looks at it directly and decides to understand what they are seeing. I started at the beginning. I read through the accounts methodically, without conclusion, following the numbers to wherever they led, rather than deciding first where they should lead and then looking for evidence to support the decision. This is the discipline of the work. It is also the discipline of the life. You do not decide what the story is and then find the facts to fit it. You find the facts, and you let the story come from them, even when the story is not the one you wanted, even when the story costs you something significant to tell. At some point, I found the discrepancy source, a categorization error propagating through the accounts for 3/4, invisible because it was small in each individual period, and significant only when you looked at the cumulative total, which nobody had done until now. I wrote up the finding, sourced it, sent the client a summary. Then I sat back and looked at my hands on the desk. My left hand was almost fully functional. There was still a specific direction of movement that produced a pull, not pain exactly, but a reminder. The body's way of saying, this happened here. I expect this will be present for a long time, and I have decided that this is acceptable. The reminder is accurate. It is not something I need to eliminate. A notification appeared on my screen, a calendar reminder. The reminder said, follow up apartment. My lease was up for renewal. I had been moving through the process automatically until I stopped and asked myself whether it was actually what I wanted or simply what I had always done. It was simply what I had always done. I clicked it to dismiss it and looked at the apartment around me, the desk with its familiar stacks, the kitchen where I had read an employer letter that told me in formal language what had already been done to me before I could wake up to stop it. I had 2 apartment viewings scheduled for the following week. A different neighborhood, closer to the river. No particular history attached to the walls. I had survived this apartment. I was done with it. I turned back to the file and started on the 2nd quarter. The numbers were clear. They were doing what numbers always do when you have the patience to follow them without conclusion. They were telling the truth. Slowly, in the way that the truth always comes, through the accumulation of small, accurate details rather than through a single dramatic revelation. They were showing me what was actually there. I sat at my desk in the morning light and I followed them. I was not the same person who had been making herself small at dinner tables and saying nothing and keeping the peace and smoothing over the cracks in other people's accounts without ever asking why the cracks were there. I was not going to become that person again. Not because I had decided to be different, but because the thing that had made me that person was gone. The old reflex, the old gravity, and it had been gone since the morning I reached into the recycling bin and did not pull the letter back out. I was a person who built documents that held up. I was a person who put numbers in the correct column. I was a person who had looked at a set of accounts arranged against her and had found in the specific way I find all things the number that did not belong and had followed it, one verified source at a time all the way to the truth. I picked up my pen. Outside the window, the city went about itself in the full ordinary manner of a summer morning, indifferent and constant and exactly as it had always been, the light on the pavement, the sound of the street below, the world continuing in its unsentimental way, with no particular interest in whether any individual person inside it had just survived something significant or had simply had an ordinary morning. I looked at the numbers on the screen. They thought I wasn't watching. I was always watching. I just hadn't decided to act yet.